I'm here with Chris Spur, the chairman of the Ulster History Circle. Would you like to tell us something about the Ulster History Circle, Chris?
Yes, the Ulster History Circle started in the early 1980s. It was founded by a man called James Hawthorne. And Jimmy Hawthorne had the idea that there was a kind of a gap in the market when it came to commemorating people of achievement in Ulster. Now, the Ulster History Circle initially started off in Northern Ireland, and from its early beginnings in 1980, there was initially then 100 plaques by round about the year 2009, and now that has grown and grown and grown, and now we've got nearly 200 plaques up. And the great thing is about the Ulster History Circle, we commemorate people of achievement from Ulster who are associated with Ulster or who've made a significant contribution to different walks of life here. And of course, when we're talking about Ulster, we're not talking about Northern Ireland now, we're talking about the whole of the 9 counties of Ulster. So we're talking about Cavan, where we are today, and Donegal and Monaghan as well. And the great thing is we've got 2 plaques, counting this one in County Cavan, we've got 2 in County Donegal and 1 in County Monaghan. So it's great that we've now got a presence cross-border, and we really can be not the Northern Ireland History Circle but the Ulster History Circle. We don't have funds of our own to pay for these plaques that are put up throughout the whole of the 9 counties of Ulster. We depend on local authorities, businesses, individuals, organisations to help to pay for our plaques. We're a voluntary body, we're non-profit making, all the money that we get goes towards putting the plaques on the wall and our modest running costs. And so we're always on the lookout for new plaque ideas, but ideas are one thing, it's having the finance to keep the, to pay for the plaques, and that's a very, very important consideration. But we love to hear people's plaques ideas.
We're here with Sergeant Summers' niece and his nephews from Dublin and Cloughjordan, and we'd like to start maybe with Sidney Cooper here, who'd like to say a few words on behalf of the family.
Well, I'm going to say them in a little while.
Okay, yeah.
When I have to make a speech. Pearl is going to do all the talking now. She
Delegation.
couldn't wait for the opportunity.
Well, we're delighted to be here, and we thank you all for honouring his memory. And isn't it a beautiful day? Uncle Jim is very important to us all, and we very much appreciate this.
Very good. And this is your brother Harold?
My brother Harold.
Harold, yeah.
And Sid and David.
I'm here with Ger Heffernan from Cloughjordan. He's a member of Cloughjordan Heritage Society, and they've done quite a bit down there in relation to Sergeant Summers. Maybe you'd like to tell us about that?
Yes, certainly. Well, up to quite recently, everybody in Cloughjordan knew of Sergeant Summers, but very little detail was known of his exploits and how he won his Victoria Cross. So last year then we made a decision in Cloughjordan Heritage Group that we would do a bit of research, and with the aid of the family we put together quite an in-depth study of Summers' life and his exploits. And in 2014, May of 2014, we published in the local Cloughjordan Heritage a comprehensive article, which I think is great that everything has been gathered together and it's now in the public domain for future generations. And in Cloughjordan we're quite proud and hold James Summers in very high regard.
I met you.
Nice to see you up there. Thank you for coming.
Council Chairman, Reverend Woods, members of the Summers family, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, my name is Chris Spur. I'm the chairman of the Ulster History Circle, and I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's plaque unveiling for James Summers VC. This is the latest of our Ulster History Circle plaques, and it's our 3rd blue plaque in the series commemorating Ulster-born Victoria Cross heroes from World War I, with a plaque put up to coincide with the centenary of their awards. This is also the Circle's 2nd plaque in County Cavan, joining one unveiled in May this year in Ballyborough for Anne Jane Carlyle. James Somers is commemorated here today in the town of his birth, exactly 100 years to the day when his valour won him the Victoria Cross in World War I. The Ulster History Circle is delighted to honour this hero of Gallipoli with this blue plaque, placed on the church where he was baptised and where his family worshipped. The Circle would particularly like to thank the Reverend Tanya Woods and the congregation here in Belturbet and the church trustees for allowing us to put up the plaque on the church, and to thank as well the Ulster Scots Agency for their financial support towards the plaque. The agency would usually have a representative present at an unveiling like this, but there's an event in Belfast today and many of their people are at it, and the agency send their apologies. Since the early 1980s, the Ulster History Circle has put up over 190 blue plaques across the 9 counties of Ulster to celebrate the achievements of those men and women who contributed significantly to our history locally, nationally and internationally. We're an entirely voluntary organisation and we rely on the support of local authorities, individuals, organisations and businesses to fund our plaques. There's no such similar organisation doing what we do anywhere throughout this island of Ireland. As I said, this is our second plaque in County Cavan, and it's good to welcome 2 representatives from Cavan County Council today. In the north, some local authorities are very supportive of the Circle's efforts, and they actively fund our plaques. It would be good to think that the council in Cavan might do this in the future. Now, having voiced that thought, I'd like to invite the chairman of Cavan County Council, Councillor Paddy Smith, to say a few words. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just when I was passing up, the CEO told me that that checkbook was nearly finished.
Well, not quite.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Cathaoirleach of Cavan County Council, I'd like to welcome you all here today to the unveiling of this blue circle to a local man. I want to acknowledge, first of all, the presence of my neighbour Tanya Woods, the CEO of Cavan County Council, Ger Finn, and also Dr. John Scott, who's going to talk to us after a few minutes. When I first started looking at Jim Somers, he was 24. And I started reading a little bit about him, and I got through a page or two, and then I went back over it again because I thought this man couldn't have gone through such an amount as this man went through from he enlisted at the age of 19. The movement of the man is just unbelievable, and I just jotted down a few things that he did. He was born here in Belturbet and he subsequently moved to Wexford. He later went to Meath and then he went to Tipperary. He first started working in Cork, where he enlisted with the army. First with the Royal Munster, before later that year in 1913 with the Enniskillen Fusiliers. He trained at Rugby and was stationed at Dover. This before going to France and later to Belgium, where he was wounded at Le Guer in 1914. And he wrote of it afterwards, I managed to stop 3 German bullets in France. After a short time recuperating, he went to Flanders, then returned to Derry, and then he went to Turkey via Egypt. And it was here that he really shone. And it was, I suppose, it's no coincidence that exactly on this day 100 years ago, he from reports, he single-handed regained the trenches that had been lost to the Allied forces. And at the end of the day, at the end of the night, there lay 30 Turks and dead and 50 injured. And for this he earned himself the Victorian Cross. Before he went to receive his Victorian Cross, he seemingly got 2 weeks, mentions that he got 2 weeks in Ireland. He must have got 2 weeks holidays as a bonus along with the Victorian Cross. Anyway, after that things went well for him. After that he went to the battle, to the Somme, and here, like many other soldiers of his time, he was subject to a chlorine gas attack, and this affected his lungs, and thereafter his lungs were in poor state. He was discharged shortly afterwards from the army. He went back to Ireland. He lived with his parents, and he died at the age of 24 on the 7th of May 1980. So a young man with a huge amount of experience, a huge amount of activity crammed into a very short life. And it's one that we here in Belturbet, you here in Belturbet even, should be very proud of this man. And as I said at the beginning, I am delighted to have been asked here today to speak a bit about Sergeant Jim Summers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. And now, as well, here from County Cavan is the Chief Executive, Ger Finn. And Ger would like to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Chairman, elect members, members of the clergy, family members of Sergeant Summers, ladies and gentlemen. I think Brendan is going to have a problem later on. I think, Paddy, you've nearly gone through the full history talk already. So I don't know, Brendan, what you're going to add to that. I thank the Ulster History Society for the invitation to the unveiling of the blue plaque in honour of Sergeant James Summers, who, as already mentioned, was born here in Belturbet in 1994 and enlisted in the British Army in 1913. Sergeant Summers was the only Cavan person that we're aware of to be awarded the Victoria Cross. In 2012, Cavan County Council published a Roll of Honour, and I think it was long overdue for so many years that we in Ireland did not recognise the part played by Irish people in the First World War. And I think at long last, as I say, in 2012, we published a Roll of Honour for Cavan. There are 652 names on this Roll of Honour. If you look at the war history, they will say there was 300 and I think it's 80 or 90 people from Cavan who died in the First World War, but through the research carried out by some of my colleagues in forming the Roll of Honour, they identified 652, and Sergeant Summers is mentioned. There's a whole section to him on this with photographs, full details of his birth, his history as Paddy has outlined, his achievements, and a photograph of his headstone, plus the death notices in the local Nina Guardian, and just a short excerpt from the Anglo-Celt of that time. So I think when we published this book, we also had special events. We erected a particular memorial to the dead of the First World War in Cavan, and both our Irish Army and our gentlemen from O&E here today all marched to this, and it was a very fitting ceremony on that day. So at last we are recognising the contribution made by our fellow Irishmen in World War I. It seems unjust that somebody who achieved so much at Gallipoli would be sent back again to suffer the injuries which finally caused his death, but unfortunately that is what war apparently is all about. I congratulate the Ulster History Society in unveiling the two blue plaques in quick succession in County Cavan. Many of you here, I recognise the faces again, will have been in Bailieborough, which the chairman has already mentioned, for the unveiling of the plaque to commemorate the life of a remarkable woman, Anne Jane Carlyle. The blue plaques were originally conceived in London in the 1860s with very specific criteria, such as have been dead for 20 years or have passed the centenary of their birth. So we meet those criteria right here. Be considered eminent by a majority of their own profession, have made an outstanding contribution to human welfare or happiness. Again, met the criteria. Have lived or worked in the building where the plaque is to be located for significant periods in time or importance within their life and work, and would be recognisable to the well-informed passerby or deserve national recognition. But over the years, the blue plaque scheme has evolved into a commemorative plaque on historical matters and administered by various organisations throughout the world. Again, as Chris has mentioned, many large cities have adopted the blue plaque programme, including Dublin and Waterford in Ireland. Cavan Town has a series of blue plaques, but again it's on a different scheme in the front of historical buildings as part of a walking tour. So I welcome the initiative of the Ulster Historical Society in erecting this plaque, as their involvement adds a special significance to the plaque. It makes us aware of a special person from this area, a war hero who would be unknown to many of us. I will have to talk to the chairman as regards his final retort when he was calling on our chairman of the county council to come, because I didn't bring the chequebook today, but I'm sure we can work together again in the near future. So well done again to everybody who's involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your little resume of how blue plaques started in England so many years ago, and thank you for that generous hint at the end of your speech there, in front of so many witnesses. That's very good. When three of us from the Ulster History Circle came to Belturbet in April past, the Reverend Tanya Woods and members of the church congregation made us very welcome, and they were all very supportive of the proposal for this blue plaque and agreed to it going on the wall of the church. So now I'd like to invite the Reverend Tanya to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to attempt to welcome everybody, because you'll see different uniforms round and you'll wonder maybe who they are all. So Bishop Ferran, Dr. Brendan Scott, County Councillors, members of the Ulster History Circle, Cavan County Council, the Royal and Enniskilling Fusiliers, UN Vets and OE Cootill, Ulster Scots, Clough Jordan Heritage Society, the family of James Somers VC, one and all. On behalf of the Select Vestry, members of this parish and myself, you are all so welcome here to Belturbet Parish Church on this beautiful day. As a parish, we are honoured to have this plaque placed on the church in memory of a very brave soldier who offered his service, who took risks, especially on the 1st and 2nd of July 1915, and who died at home with his parents as a very young man. James was baptised here in this church on the 27th of June 1894, where he would have been welcomed as a member of Christ's flock. Today, the worship continues in this place to a God who is the same, back in 1894, yesterday, today and tomorrow. James Somers joined the Enniskillen Fusiliers in 1913 and went to war. And as we're told in Ecclesiastes 3, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time for war and a time for peace. And today is a time to remember a brave soldier who began his life here in Belturbet, who fought for freedom and who lost his life. I know that Dr. Brendan Scott will be telling us more about the life of James Somers. But can I invite you when this is all done, to the Fairgreen National School, where the ladies of the parish have prepared refreshments for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Tanya, and thank you again for your kind invitation to the National School afterwards. As we've heard, James Summers joined the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers just over 100 years ago. And to speak to us now, we have the chairman of their Regimental Association, Colonel David Twigg. Colonel.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and old soldiers, the Victoria Cross is the highest military decoration awarded for valour in the face of the enemy to members of the armed forces of various Commonwealth countries and former British Empire territories. It takes precedence over all other decorations and medals. Since its inception by Queen Victoria in 1858, only 1,356 awards have been made, and of which only 116 have been made to Irishmen, and it is one of those who we honour here today. James Summers was born here in Belturbet on the 12th of June 1894, the son of Robert, a carpenter, and Charlotte Summers, and he was the eldest of 6 children. He initially joined the Special Reserve of the Royal Munster Fusiliers on the 13th of January in 1913, before the outbreak of the First World War. He transferred to the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers in July 1914, and on the outbreak of war he went to Belgium and France with his battalion and was subsequently promoted to Lance Corporal. He was severely wounded at the retreat from Mons in August 1914 and was evacuated to England to recover, and spent Christmas 1914 at home with his family, who were then living in Tipperary. Once recovered, he was posted to the 1st Battalion, the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. He probably joined them in England on their return from India, and before proceeding to Gallipoli, where he landed on X Beach on the 25th of April 1915. The Gallipoli campaign was a disaster from the beginning, having been dogged by poor leadership, poor training, and almost no intelligence. On the night of the 1st and 2nd of July, exactly 100 years ago, last night, 1st Enniskillens were in the front line against the Turks. Summers held out alone in a forward sap, which was an original name for a trench, throughout the night after the men who were supposed to hold it with him withdrew. As dawn approached, reinforcements brought up a fresh supply of grenades. Using these, Summers led an attack against the Turkish positions and captured a section of their trench. The position was held throughout the day, with Summers making frequent trips back to the rear to obtain fresh supplies of ammunition and water. Summers was promoted to the rank of sergeant immediately following for his courageous action, as it says, for distinguished conduct in the field. In a letter back home to his father, Summers wrote, "I beat the Turks out of the trench single-handed and had 4 awful hours at night. The Turks swarmed in from all directions, but I gave them a rough time of it and still holding the trench. It is certain sure we are beating the Turks all right. In the trench I came out of, it was shocking to see the dead. They lay about 3,000 Turks in front of our trenches, and the smell was absolutely chronic. You know, when the sun was shining on those bodies for 3 or 4 days, it makes a horrible smell. A person would not mind if it was possible to bury them. But no, you dare not put your nose outside the trench, and if you did, you were a dead man." So much for his own words, but the official citation, published in the London Gazette on the 1st of September 1915, reads as follows: "For the most conspicuous gallantry on the night of the 1st and 2nd of July 1915, in the southern zone of the Gallipoli Peninsula when, owing to hostile bombing, some of his troops had retired from the sap. Summers remained there alone on the spot until a party brought up bombs. He then climbed over into the Turkish trench and bombed the Turks with great effect. Later on, he advanced into the open under heavy fire and held back the enemy by throwing bombs into their flank until a barricade had been established. During this period, he frequently ran to and from our trenches to obtain fresh supplies of bombs. By his great gallantry and coolness, Summers was largely instrumental in effecting the recapture of our trenches, which had been lost. Sergeant Summers was decorated with his Victoria Cross by King George V at Buckingham Palace on the 14th of October 1915. Summers remained in Gallipoli until the close of the campaign, later seeing service in France with the 8th Service Battalion before taking part in the 1st of July attack on the Somme of Beaumont Hamel. During this latter period of service in France, he suffered severely from gas poisoning. On the 1st of April 1917, he transferred to the Transport Division of the Army Service Corps. However, he was subsequently medically discharged from the Army as a result of gas poisoning. He returned to Ireland, to Clough Jordan in County Tipperary, where his family were now living, and where he died on the 7th of May 1918, aged 24. He was buried with full military honours at Modrini Cemetery, where his father was the sexton. His Union Jack draped coffin was carried on a gun carriage led by the pipe band of the Cameron Highlanders. It is worth noting that the second VC won by the Inniskillings in Gallipoli was won by Captain Gerald O'Sullivan on exactly the same day as Summers won his VC. The World War I memorial VC stones to both these brave Inniskillings were unveiled in Glasnevin Cemetery on the 25th of April this year. Unfortunately, the location of Sergeant Summers' Victoria Cross is not known and is presumed to be in a private collection, possibly with that of the family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Plaque. And as we know, James Summers won his VC at Gallipoli. And with us today is Foster Summerson of the Gallipoli Association. Foster is also the editor of the association's journal, the Gallipolian, and I was delighted to see that a notice of today's event is posted in the online edition of the magazine, which is read the world over. And now I'd like to invite Foster to say a few words.
Thank you very much, particularly for inviting me here, and I'd like to thank the organisers and for the honour of coming. Perhaps I should say something, first of all, about the Gallipoli Association. It was founded in 1969, that's some over 50 years since the campaign ended, founded by veterans of the campaign who decided after 50 years that it was appropriate perhaps that Gallipoli shouldn't be forgotten. And the association has grown from those days in 1969, but our founding aims remain, and that is to honour all of those who served at Gallipoli and who died there, not only from the Allied side, and there were over 500,000 Allied troops at Gallipoli, but also from the Ottoman side, where there was a similar number of troops involved. So we're talking in terms of 1 million men, and also Germans. So there were some Germans in the campaign as well. In terms of casualties, something over 250,000 men became casualties on the Allied side, of whom, and I'll have to refer to my notes here, some
58,000 died. Of these, 29,500 were from Britain and Ireland, something in the region of 12,000 from France, and 10,000 from Australia and New Zealand combined. So the leading role in the campaign was undoubtedly by British and Irish forces. And that perhaps puts a little of Sergeant Somers' achievement in context in terms of overall casualties, and we shouldn't only remember, I think, Sergeant Somers, but also all of those who died during the Gallipoli campaign. But it's right and proper that Somers is commemorated here, where he was born and worshipped. And it's often the case, sadly, that VCs fade from memory, but not, I think, here. I don't think his memory has ever faded here. And it's a strange coincidence for me to be invited to this commemoration, because as you can tell from my accent, I'm English. But before I moved to Northern Ireland 5 years ago, I was involved in another commemoration of a VC, a Lieutenant James, who died in 1950, forgotten and alone. And it's sad that he's probably not the only VC to have died in those circumstances. And the reason I'm mentioning James is, interestingly, James was wounded and won his VC in the same action as Sergeant Somers. Indeed, it was probably only, I think you use kilometres here, but it was probably not more than half a kilometre from where Somers was, that James was. So they both won their VCs on the same day within a very short distance of one another. And that I think is perhaps appropriate to mention here. I won't go on any longer. If anyone wants to know about the Gallipoli Association, I will be happy to talk to them over the tea and refreshments that have been so kindly promised. But thanks to the Ulster History Circle for all they're doing, and of course in particular on behalf of the association, I'd like to commend them for the plaque that is being unveiled shortly to Sergeant Somers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foster. Thank you. And I'd like particularly to thank my colleagues on the Ulster History Circle, Maud Hamill and Leslie McCaig, for all the hard work that they've put into make today's event happen. This is Leslie's home county, and I know he's very pleased that we're to have a second plaque in County Cavan. But of course, the Somers family left Ulster when James was very young, and eventually they settled in Cloughjordan in County Tipperary. That Munster town is proud of its Ulster-born hero, and the Cloughjordan Heritage Group has given talks on James Somers and has published on him in their journal Cloughjordan Heritage. That article on James Somers is well worth reading for the amount of research, detail and illustrations that the article contains. And I'm delighted that we have the author of the piece here today with us, Ger Heffernan. And to speak on behalf of the Cloughjordan Heritage Group, Ger, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here in Belturbet this afternoon, representing Cloughjordan Heritage Group, to participate in the unveiling of the blue plaque dedicated to Sergeant James Somers. The chairman of Cloughjordan Heritage Group, Jim Casey, is out of the country at present, and he and his wife, May, send their apologies for being unable to attend. As you will hear later, the Somers family home was on Church Road in Cloughjordan, County Tipperary, and it was there that Sergeant James Somers died in May of 1918. Where the VC recipient actually regarded as home is not clear, having been born here in Belturbet and moving with his parents while still quite young to live in a number of different locations throughout Ireland. Cloughjordan was, however, certainly home to his parents and siblings. The historical older name for the area around Cloughjordan is Modrini, and it is in St. Kieran's churchyard, Modrini, 2 kilometres from the town, he is laid to rest. Last year, to mark the centenary of the outbreak of World War I, Cloughjordan Heritage Group held a very moving and well-attended wreath-laying ceremony at Sergeant Somers' grave. There, the names of all those from the locality who are known to have joined up were read out. In excess of 60 names, of whom 32 made the supreme sacrifice. This ceremony was held on the May Bank Holiday weekend, during which annually Cloughjordan remembers another native, Thomas MacDonagh, one of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. The exploits and gallantry of Sergeant James Somers' career will no doubt be covered in detail later, as it has already been in some detail, but later by Dr. Brendan Scott. I merely intend to give a Cloughjordan perspective. I would like to take this opportunity to mention James's brother Albert, who by all accounts had the same steely nerve under fire as his older brother. Albert was awarded the military medal for bravery on the Western Front, but was killed in action in the last month of the war. Coincidentally, another recipient of the military medal, RIC Constable James Briggs from Scotland, lost his life in an engagement during the War of Independence at the Modrini ambush of the 3rd of June 1921, a very, very short distance from Modrini churchyard, where Sergeant Somers is buried. We also remember Robert Wilson Somers and his wife Charlotte. In just 10 months between January and October 1918, they lost 2 sons, James and Albert, and a granddaughter, Victoria, Sergeant James Somers' newborn daughter. In conclusion, I wish to thank the organisers for the invitation to attend this unveiling. Cloughjordan Heritage Group holds Sergeant James Somers in high regard locally, and we feel it only fitting that he is remembered both here in Belturbet and in Cloughjordan. Thank you.
Ger, thank you very much. And now from one historian from Munster to another one, very much from here in Ulster and very local, Dr. Brendan Scott. Brendan is well known as the author of several books and articles on Irish history in the 16th and 17th centuries, and he has, of course, as we know, the distinction of having Belturbet as his hometown. So we're very privileged to have this distinguished historian here today to speak to us about his fellow Belturbet man, Sergeant James Somers. Brendan.
I don't know what a privilege it is. You can see me knocking about the town most days, so, you know, but anyway. Very, very pleased to be asked to speak here today. It's a real honour for me. Ger mentioned earlier on when Paddy had spoken, he said, I don't know how much you have left to talk about now. I thought, I have a bit, and then somebody else got up and said another lot. I thought, right, okay. And then somebody else came up with another bit. Right. So it's going to be short and sweet, but all the better because you can get to the tea and buns quicker then. I'd like to say a few things first off, just about James Somers himself, or how he's perceived in the town, or whether he was known in the town. Growing up in Belturbet, as I did just down on Holborn Hill, growing up I passed this way countless numbers of times. I never knew the history of that house. Well, I knew it was attached to the church here, but who had lived in the house. I'd never actually heard of James Somers until I went to university, had to do a course on World War I, and learned a bit about him then. I then saw more about him in a book that George Morrissey did. I don't know, is George here today? Where George mentioned him as well. And then, as Ger mentioned there, the Roll of Honour book, which had a good section on him as well. And it got me thinking about, well, why do we not know more about James Summers in Belturbet? Well, partly I suspect because the family had moved away, they were gone for so long. That was part of the reason. I also think our location on the border during the Troubles, this wasn't something, I don't think you'd see this event 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but it's great that you can see it today. The fact as well that there was a bomb just down the road as well, these things all just, created, I suppose, an atmosphere where something like this I don't think would have been possible. Now that this is being done, and I see members from all communities here, just speaks, I think, to how far we've moved on as a nation, and as a means of inclusiveness as well. So it's great to see that happening. Ger mentioned as well that he was the only man from Cavan in World War I to get a VC. There were a number of other men who also have received VCs from Cavan from their inception up until I think 1946. Leslie McCaig, who has been a quiet participant today but has been instrumental in organising today, has written a very, very good essay about Cavan VC recipients in the latest issue of Breffni, which I edited, which was released last week, which can be bought for €25 up in Cavan. I'll just say that. But it got me thinking as well, as we heard what he actually did in Gallipoli, that he held a trench, that he that he went on these continual attacks despite his comrades falling back. That is a level of bravery and courage that to me is incomprehensible. I don't know how anyone could show such bravery. If you can imagine the fear and the terror which people must have felt under attack, and he just kept going. To me, that is an extraordinary thing, and he obviously was an extraordinary man. As we've heard, he was born just here beside us at the sexton's house, where his father was the sexton in 1894. His family eventually settled in Cloughjordan, and which I was glad to see. My brother lives in Borrisacane, which isn't too far away from there, so Belturbet has been sending its best men down to Cloughjordan area for a long time now. And he'd be very pleased that I said that. I thought it was interesting that he joined the Inniskilling, despite the fact that he had moved around so much. He'd settled in Tipperary, and he was actually working in Cork, in Bantry, in a house in Bantry at the time when he signed up. And I don't know whether that was a link with home, or whether he thought it was a good way of seeing the world. The Inniskillings were quite international at that time, so whether that had something to do with it, but he joined up a good year or more before the war actually started, so maybe he thought that was a good way of seeing the world for a while. But that bravery, as I say, it just keeps coming back to me, how he did such a thing. After he received his VC commendation, he went home to Cloughjordan, where he was received grandly, and they wanted to play one song. They didn't know the tune that they wanted, so they played Hail Glory of St. Patrick when he came in, so it did the job anyway. He met King George V when he received his VC over in Buckingham Palace a few weeks later. And again, an extraordinary thing for a guy who grew up in humble surroundings, to have met the head of the empire at that stage is an extraordinary thing. And he married, while he was convalescing, I assume, this lady was from Newcastle in England, a girl called Kitty Scott, who she was no relation, I assume. And he married her, and didn't have much time, I suppose, as was the way in wartime. And it must have been a very difficult time for her, because they had a child in December 1917, a wee girl called Victoria, who died in January, so about a month later. And then in May, he died. So you can imagine the poor woman, and she wasn't from here, and she had to deal with that heartache as well. She moved home afterwards. And when you think of a story like that, it's just the sheer waste of life, an entire generation wiped out, and the bravery and the belief that these people had, whether you believe in war or whether you believe in the rights and wrongs of these things. This was a man who was willing to put down his life for what he believed in, and he did that with bravery and courage and dignity, and I don't think anyone can ever ask or expect anything else of a man. Personally, as I was his neighbour, I'm very proud to have that connection to our town. I'm very proud as well of the town that we can have something like this, put our difficult past behind us, and that we can move on in a spirit of understanding and reconciliation, which I think these things, the events like this are so important, to do things like that, so that we learn about the past, so we understand the past, and we can move on into the future together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you. And now we're moving to the unveiling. Don't forget, of course, as the Reverend Tanya said, there are refreshments in the National School just down that way and down Railway Road. And that's waiting for us, I guess, very shortly. After the unveiling, there'll be a chance to take a few photographs, etc., because I'm sure many of you will want to take commemorative photographs. As Brendan has rightly said, this is an exceptional event. I think it's very special for the Ulster History Circle, and it is very special, I think, for the town of Belturbet as well. And as Brendan again said, it's something that is happening now that probably couldn't have happened not too long ago. So, on behalf of the Summers Plaque to unveil the plaque this evening, we're delighted to have with us from Dublin, Sidney Cooper, the nephew of James Summers. Sidney will say a few words on behalf of the Summers family and then unveil the plaque to his uncle, James Summers, VC.
Reverend Tanya Woods, special guests, and all other guests, thank you. I'm not going to be able to speak as well as all those people who have just spoken before me. It's an impossibility. Although they've covered every subject that I can think of for our Uncle Jim. So I will just go very briefly. I was only doing my duty. These were the simple words that James Summers, a Lance Corporal at that time, spoke to his commanding officer, General Ian Standish Hamilton, when he was being congratulated for his courage the previous 2 days in defending the trench that he had been in. Immediately after this, he was promoted to sergeant, and then a short while later he was presented with a Victoria Cross. All this has been covered today, so it's difficult. James Summers was born 121 years ago, just down the road, and it's fitting that today his surviving niece Pearl, his nephew Harold, his nephew David, and myself are able to be here today to participate in the unveiling of the blue plaque in his honour. And I can tell you it's one great honour for the Summers family. It's already been mentioned about him meeting and marrying Kitty Scott and the tragic death of Victoria, so I'll not go into that one. But Jim Summers had two sisters, Charlotte, who was David and my mother, and Sophia, commonly called Dolly, who was the mother of Harold and Pearl. He also had three brothers, Harold, Harry, sometimes called Henry, Albert, and John. All three joined the army. Two survived, that was Harry and John. They lived active lives and to their old age. Albert, unfortunately, was sadly killed in France, but not before he had won a military medal and a cross and a bar, which I think is pretty good. And he was 20 years of age then, has already been said. Perhaps my most important part today is to thank all the people who've been here. So I want to express, on behalf of the Summers family, our grateful thanks for such a wonderful tribute to our Uncle Jim. Our thanks are due, and in no special order, to Mr. Maynard Hanna of the Ulster Scots Agency for their financial support, Mr. Chris Spur of the Ulster History Circle, who are a voluntary group, and especially Mr. Leslie McCaig, who has put an enormous amount of work into this, I think assisted by Maud Hamill, so thank you all. Councillor Paddy Smith, Chairman of Cavan County Council, and Mr. Ger Finn, Acting County Manager. The man with the chequebook, be nice to him. The Reverend Tanya Woods and the church for their permission to allow the blue plaque to be erected on their building. and also for providing the refreshments which we're very shortly going to enjoy. Lieutenant Colonel David Twigg, Chairman of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, the Association of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, Mr. Foster Summerson of the Gallipoli Association and editor of the Gallipolian, Mr. Ger Heffernan of Clock Jordan Heritage Society, who has written at length on James Summers, and finally, but by no means least, Dr. Brendan Scott from Belturbet. I imagine I must have inadvertently omitted somebody, but if I do, I apologise. It was not intentional. Thank you. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I mean, the Gallipoli Association was founded in 1969 by veterans of the campaign, and until the mid-1990s there were still veterans still alive, and we commemorate all those who served at Gallipoli on both sides, the Ottoman side and the Allied side, and that really is our remit now and in the future. And of course the centenary of the campaign this year in 2015 has revived interest, wide interest in the campaign.